Following his audience, Captain Iska led His Majesty aboard Ruin's Wake for a tour. After inspecting the ship, the Sorcerer King lingered to take a longer look around, and Ludmilla took the Elder Lich aside to allow Lady Shaltir time alone with her liege. Ludmilla retrieved a folded crimson banner from an infinite haversack, presenting it to the captain. "What's this?" "Something for Ruin's Wake," Ludmilla replied. "I am uncertain what a ghost ship might like for her adornment, but I thought she should at least fly an ensign." Under their feet, the floorboards seemed to glow more brightly as the captain stared down silently at the precious fabric. "Thank you, my lady." Captain Iska held out his arms to receive the flag of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. "I believe I owe you my life, as well. I don't know what came over me. One look at His Dark Majesty and all I could think of doing was groveling at his feet. Until now, I've always thought those mortals' notions of gods foolish and nonsensical. Do you feel the same way when you look upon him?" Though he became quite excitable around the Sorcerer King, Ludmilla highly doubted that an Elder Lich harbored the same feelings and physical sensations over His Majesty as she or Lady Shaltir did, or did they? It didn't seem that way with the captain, at any rate. "It's something that will take time to grow accustomed to," she said. "Regardless of how you feel, it would be best if you defer to His Majesty as a sovereign." The Elder Lich turned to regard her curiously. He was still adorned in the garb lent to him for his audience. The Sorcerer King had permitted him to borrow it until he could find a suitable replacement. "Would it not be better to address him as a divine being?" he asked. "As far as I understand, a god is in a much higher position than a mere king." "His Majesty has chosen to style himself the Sorcerer King, Ainzul Gaon," Ludmilla answered. "So that is who he is. Perhaps, in time, you will come to understand why he dwells amongst us in this fashion." "You have achieved the level of insight required to grasp this great mystery?" Ludmilla couldn't exactly call it a great mystery. It was more that the reason was so pure and simple that one could not truly accept it unless they realized what it was on their own. Those not of her faith would probably have an even more difficult time wrapping their heads around it. "Perhaps," she replied with a slight smile. "More importantly, any insight on this matter will not change how things are done in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Your behavior is passable for common interactions, but you will need to work on your formal conduct. It is something that all merchants are well versed in, and is especially important when dealing with aristocrats and royalty." "Aristocrats, as well? I understand what would have happened to me if not for your having put in a good word, but you didn't seem offended at all when we spoke before." "I wasn't," Ludmilla told him, "but it was within the bounds of acceptable conduct in those specific circumstances. There are different expectations for different settings. I believe you realize how fierce loyal vassals are when it comes to upholding the dignity of the crown, and the vassals of noble houses are no different when it comes to the dignity of the house that they serve. So if something similar happened with Lady Shaltir, you would have destroyed me on the spot? If the breach in decorum was severe enough, yes. Additionally, there are fates worse than death, especially for those with a limitless lifespan." An audible swallow issued from Captain Iska's non-existent throat. After a moment, he raised a hand to scratch his head. "In that case," he said, "I suppose I should learn a few things before I meet with this Countess Corlin." "Once you know and understand the rules," Ludmilla said, "you'll find that they're not unreasonable. It's stepping into pitfalls stemming from ignorance that tend to land one in the greatest amount of trouble." "I'll keep that in mind, my lady. Thank you, once again." The Elder Lich bowed slightly before heading off with banner in hand. The glow of the deck intensified beneath him. Yeah, Captain Iska groused, "keep your skirts on." Ludmilla watched with a bemused smile as the Elder Lich floated up with the ghost ship impatiently awaiting its new ensign. She returned to her vessel to prepare for their departure. The Sorcerer King and Lady Shaltir returned a half-hour later, and Ludmilla looked up in surprise at their unexpected arrival. "Did something happen, Your Majesty? I thought you would be traveling aboard Ruin's Wake." "The captain insisted on going ahead to prepare for our arrival," the Sorcerer King replied. "Maybe he has a mess to clean up." She wasn't sure what His Majesty meant by that, but he seemed to say so in good humor. They watched as Ruin's Wake sailed on ahead, its keel floating a good meter over the surface of the river. "That ship is strangely tall," Ludmilla remarked. "I believe it's meant to be an ocean-going vessel," His Majesty said. "A good part of it should be below the water." If it had not been a ghost ship, Ruin's Wake would have been unsuited for navigating the upper half of the Katza River. Once it disappeared into the mist, the Sorcerer King disembarked to inspect the dredged-up wreckage along the shore. They landed near where her undead company awaited. A long line of dripping hulls stretched off into the mist. "This is a lot to go through," His Majesty said. "I'll have Cocytus send a few survey teams over for a thorough investigation. Still, these ships are unlike Ruin's Wake in appearance." From what she could make out of their remains, they were all smaller than the huge ghost ship. Many appeared to be designed for deeper waters, but they lacked the larger vessel's distinguishing features. "Ruin's Wake is a warship," she said, "while these are civilian vessels." "What brought you to that conclusion, Lady Zaradnik?" "I don't think a merchant would name their ship Ruin's Wake," she smirked. "Its construction also suggests that it was built for combat. The vessel is very long compared to these ones, and the interior has armor plating behind those ports lined up along its middle deck. I could imagine magic casters or archers stationed at each." "Then why are there so many of these other vessels along this stretch of the river? Another desperate battle involving civilians as we saw before?" Ludmilla shook her head, frowning out at the dozens of broken wrecks that they walked by. She couldn't be absolutely sure due to their rotting structures, but they did all appear to have gaping holes torn into them, perhaps by the same creature that had left the gouges in the university's walls. "I think they were trying to flee upriver," she said. "The existence of the Ruin's Wake shows that the people who lived here had substantial maritime capabilities. I doubt they only had a single warship, yet this is the first graveyard of ships that we've come across. My guess is that this territory was attacked from the south, possibly starting from the sea and going up the river." "I see. If that is the case, there should be a graveyard filled with warships south of the capital where they fought to bar the advance of their enemy." "Yes, Your Majesty," Ludmilla nodded. "These ships were probably trying to get civilians to safety, but they were sailing upstream against the wind. They didn't make it far. From the attacker's perspective, commencing their assault from the south was tactically sound. One must wonder how often this sort of thing happens." She looked up at His Majesty, curious over his musings. Shouldn't the Sorcerer King be aware of major, world-influencing events such as these? Or did an ascended god not perceive time and events in the same way as those with a temporal existence? It might also be that His Majesty was purposely concealing what he knew for some unfathomable purpose. "If what little history we have of the distant past is any indicator," Ludmilla said, "powerful beings appear every century or so. The 6 descended 600 years ago, the 8 Greed Kings, 500. The demon gods appeared 200 years ago, and Bohadan, my old village priest, mentioned that the theocracy was preparing for something a century ago. And now, us," the Sorcerer King finished for her. "I wonder if other powerful beings have appeared, or if other powerful beings remain from the past. This area of the world can't be the only place where it happens." "The center of the 8 Greed Kings' power is actually quite a distance away from here," Ludmilla noted. "Far to the south, perhaps half the world away. It is a floating citadel over a vast desert that I think might be the same Zabaku that you described as being a habitat for mummies. According to local legend, however, the 8 Greed Kings are all dead and only their legacy remains." "What sort of legacy did they leave behind?" Ludmilla paused in thought, sorting through the little that she had heard. "Most of their history is shrouded in legend," she said, "though more accurate accounts may be found nearer to their former centers of power. Perhaps, like the 6, they have left descendants of their own. The only somewhat concrete thing I can think of, however, is the fact that weapon masters specializing in swords will make pilgrimages to that area to secure some famous type of sword." "What sword is that?" "A blade that can carve through steel like mud. Even when unenchanted, they are superior to enchanted blades of a different make. Something about being folded 1,000 times?" "Oh, that sword. Such swords truly exist, Your Majesty?" "They exist, but the rules we went over about equipment durability and hardness still apply. Even if some unknown crafting methods are being used, those swords should still function within the same mechanical framework." The Sorcerer King slowed his steps, turning to walk over to a wreck that appeared to be in somewhat decent condition. He cast a spell and 4 large water elementals appeared before him. They moved according to his unspoken orders, using their bodies to purge the hull of silt and debris. As they worked, His Majesty quietly scanned their surroundings. Once it seemed that no threats would arise from their activity, he turned to address her. "Lady Zaradnik," he said. "Take your company and clear out a yard to store the salvage from all these wrecks. The survey teams are already on their way, but I'd like to go through a few of them myself." "It will be done, Your Majesty." She jogged away, leaving Lady Shiltir to attend to the Sorcerer King. Despite moving into ever-increasing concentrations of negative energy, there was still no sign of intelligent undead manifesting on the plain. As she cleared the already familiar undead from the area, it occurred to her that they might have not come across any elder liches, vampires or other types of cognizant undead because they had better things to do than stand in one spot forever. Their chances of just happening to cross paths with one right when they manifested were infinitesimally small. An elder lich might dominate several dozen of the local mindless undead for personal protection before leaving to find a suitable lair. A vampire would probably head out to locate a favorable feeding ground. Both appeared semi-frequently in the Adventurer Guild records, so it may have been that they were all originally from the Katza Plains or other negative energy areas. It wasn't as if they were obliged to draw attention to themselves when they left their place of birth. Upon her return to the shore, Ludmilla found a variety of articles arrayed in front of the wreck. Most appeared to be from broken containers, contents rotted into an unrecognizable state. The Sorcerer King held a small lion-bound chest in his hands, cocking an ear as he shook it experimentally beside his head. Lady Shiltir had her pipette lance at the ready, as if expecting some world-ending threat to emerge. After several shakes, the bottom of the chest fell out and its contents spilt to the ground. "Ah! Look out!" Lady Shiltir threw herself bodily at His Majesty. The chest flew from the Sorcerer King's hands, and together they rolled away. Ludmilla walked up to the fallen chest and its contents, bending over to pick up a gold coin. Strangely enough, it was one familiar to her, a gold trade coin. They were twice the weight of a Riastai's gold coin and accepted in every nation that she knew of. Turning the coin slowly between her gauntleted fingers, she mused over the fact that these coins were also a piece of history that stretched beyond the 200-year wall created by the demon gods. Trade currency had no known origin, they had seemingly always been around. Even if one part of the world was destroyed in some calamity, trade would inevitably flow back in from the rest of it as lands were resettled and civilizations rebuilt themselves. She drew her skirt under her as she squatted to sift through the coins on the ground, looking for one that she did not recognize. It wasn't long until she found something unfamiliar. The profile of a human figure was minted onto a gold coin of roughly the same weight as a trade coin. "What have you found?" Ludmilla looked up to find the Sorcerer King returning to the chest. Shiltir hovered around him, frantically brushing off the dust he had picked up from tumbling over the ground. Ludmilla rose to her feet and offered His Majesty the strange gold coin. "I've not seen a coin with this figure before," she said. "The other coins appear to be gold trade coins commonly found in circulation to this day." The Sorcerer King raised the coin in front of him. After a moment, he produced an identical coin from his inventory. "It appears that we have a connection," His Majesty said, though not a specific time period. "Where is this coin from, Your Majesty?" "There are thousands of them in the royal vault of Fiobakana," he replied. "According to the dwarves, they are from the human nation that once occupied the entire area around the Azalizia Mountains." His Majesty returned the coin to Ludmilla, pressing it into her palm. "Keep it," he said. "It may be of use to you in the future." Once the survey teams and their escorts arrived, the Sorcerer King and his entourage boarded the Nara and they went on their way. After Ludmilla made her periodic report to the Grand Marshal, she stared down at the strange coin that His Majesty had permitted her to keep, pondering its significance. It was a coin from a nation unknown to her as a former subject of Riastais, despite the notion that Riastais was supposedly located within its former borders. Even with her aristocratic education, which lent great weight to culture, history and language, she was just as ignorant of it as she was of the civilization that once occupied the Katza Plains. The histories of the theocracy, whose records traced back all the way to the original advent of the six great gods, made no specific mention of any human nations to its north. All she knew was that humans were once more widespread in the past, and they were driven to near extinction, cornered in a portion of the land where the theocracy now stood. With this being the case, the nation to which this coin belonged was ancient indeed. The only pieces of present-day knowledge that seemed like a tie to this ancient human history were the various claims made on the Katza Plains and its surrounding regions by every country along its borders. Perhaps they were not lying or twisting the facts at all. It was possible that all of the human nations of the region were descended, in part or in whole, from the ancient human population that fell before the onslaught of their inhuman neighbors. Once the great seeding was underway, these descendants spread to reclaim their lost lands, all sharing the same ancestral claims. Hopefully, a decisive answer could be found in Lagos, the capital of the ruined Katza Plains. If not, she would have to extend her efforts to the Dwarf Kingdom and any other leads that she came across. The first sign that they were approaching the city was not any ruins or a tower, but a drastic increase in the concentration of negative energy. Ludmilla narrowed her eyes at the sensation. It was not just a massive amount of death, but most likely the sort that was unexpected and unwanted, the mass slaughter of innocents caught up in an unremembered tempest of anguish and grief. Leveled ruins characteristic of the region appeared along the nearby eastern shore. After about a kilometer traveling further downriver, a tower appeared out of the mists, looming over the water. It was not as large as its counterpart in the previous city, but neither was it the only one. Two more towers came into view, both eerily truncated at exactly the same height as every other tower in the plains. Her eyes traced the ruined skyline, then widened as she noticed what lay ahead. Hard to starboard. The ship listed heavily as the captain immediately responded to her urgent order. The vampire brides moved to secure the furniture in the hold. Lady Shiltier leaned against the throne to keep it from sliding off of the deck. Her angry voice rolled over the bow. What was that? There was no need to answer Lady Shiltier's shout. Shattered remains of a toppled tower came into view. The Sorcerer King rose to his feet after the ship righted itself again. His Majesty came forward to where Ludmilla stood agape at the sight. Now I'm really curious, the Sorcerer King said. This building is at least twice as tall as the palace spires in our winter. More to the point, it's wider than the Imperial Palace. They continued to glide along the side of the fallen structure, following its length as it gradually disappeared into the river. The slow, roiling anger from before rose within Ludmilla again, and a tear trickled down her right cheek. I can't take this, Your Majesty, she said through gritted teeth. Why would anyone do this? Even demi-humans would understand the significance of such architectural achievements, would they not? I believe that anyone possessed of intelligence should, His Majesty replied. Demi-human, heteromorph or otherwise. You are an upright and earnest individual, Lady Zaradnik, so you may not understand that the appreciation of monumental undertakings does not invariably lead to awe and respect. It may just as easily lead to envy, fear and spite. Surely, such actions are unforgivable. Indeed, the Sorcerer King's voice grew grim. If anyone threatened ruin upon what I consider an important legacy, I would grant them no quarter. Nothing of their existence would remain, well, maybe some small reminder of their folly. Ludmilla's astonishment and ensuing anger persisted as they rounded the submerged top of the tower. She couldn't imagine the time, effort or artifice required to raise such a grand structure. That it was one amongst many further drove home how prosperous and advanced the region once was. The political and economic shockwaves its downfall must have sent throughout the region must have been ruinous in themselves. 10 minutes later, the ruins' wake came into view, anchored just offshore of a massive harbor gate. Within, they found a single berth that appeared to have been recently cleaned up. Captain Iska flew over, hovering alongside her vessel. Welcome to Lagos, Your Majesty, he said. We've cleared a berth. Well, it's where the ruins' wake usually moors herself, but it's the best we could do on such short notice. Not that I hold that against you, Your Major. I understand, Captain Iska, the Sorcerer King answered with a regal nod of his head. Thank you for your warm welcome. I would like to borrow Baroness Zaradnik if Your Majesty does not mind. I have a number of colleagues in the city, and they're more, normal as far as elder liches go. They're going to require some preparation, lest they suffer Lady Shiltier's wrath. Very well, His Majesty said. We'll be taking a look around in the meantime. Of course, Your Majesty, the elder lich bobbed his bestial skull. As our sovereign, you may go wherever you wish. Ludmilla followed Captain Iska out of the harbor district. Unlike the other cities, the streets they walked through were lined with mostly intact buildings. Spectral undead could occasionally be seen drifting by, but the mindless undead along their path appeared to have been cleared away in preparation for His Majesty's impending arrival. Like the other cities, however, everything was caked with the dust of ages. "Why is the condition of Lagos so different?" she asked. "Everything was leveled on our way here." "It seems that someone did try, my lady," the elder Lich answered. "There are sections of the city that were reduced to rubble, the outskirts and the southwestern quarter are totally destroyed, and the city's been put to the torch. Whoever it was couldn't finish the job, though. The towers and buildings in the city center are magically reinforced and the invaders simply ran out of time." "Run out of time?" I don't think they understood the full implications of forcefully depopulating a city of this size. Meaning to say that the sheer amount of violent death suddenly piled up in one location led to an explosion of negative energy. If the thus far accurate estimates for the region's population centers held, 500,000 people once lived here. There was no time to take care of the aftermath and probably no interest in purifying the city. By the looks of the wind-blown pavement, nature was also heavily suppressed, so there was nothing to counteract the cascade of undeath that manifested in the wake of the city's downfall. "Have you any idea who did this?" "No, only their trail of devastation was left behind. As far as I can tell, it started from the south. There's a whole fleet of sunken warships north of the river delta, so whoever lived here had time to prepare for what came. After that, well, everything downriver was flattened like you saw up north." She continued following the elder Lich through the city's half-buried thoroughfares, eventually reaching a grand promenade leading up to a magnificent dome. At the top of the slowly ascending path, she stopped at the sight awaiting her. "This can't be right." Proudly looking over the approach was a 6-meter-tall statue. Ludmilla blinked slowly as she registered its features. "Captain Iska," she said. "Did you raise a statue of yourself here?" "That's a good joke, my lady," he chuckled, "but I'm just an elder Lich, not whatever you call people that work with stone. It's got fur and flesh and a nice set of equipment, too." The statue that stood before her was that of a feathered beastman. One arm was held behind its back, while the clawed hand of its other arm was raised in a powerful, triumphant gesture. Rather than savage and fearsome, the figure looked resolute and regal. She walked up to the base of the statue, attempting to make out the unmarred words carved into the pillar at the base. "Duke Iska." Ludmilla looked up at the elder Lich. "I thought you couldn't read this script." "That's who he is," the captain shrugged. "I was born right here, at the base of this statue. Something told me that's who I am, and that's who he was. Since I appear to have manifested as an echo of this individual, he must have been a great figure indeed." She looked back at the wording on the pillar. Some of the words and letters were familiar, but many were not. A few were quite clear. "Duke Iska, Pentarch of Lagos. Lagos. Something Tiger of the Reach. Second day, Upper Wind Month, 135th year, High Imperial Calendar. Beastman royalty, in a human empire?" "For someone that isn't from around here," the captain said lightly, "your grasp of the local language is surprisingly good." "There is some guesswork involved," she replied absently. "The script here has many letters and symbols that are common to the region, but a few are entirely foreign to me, probably ones borrowed from non-human languages. These numbers are the same as those that we use, the words." Ludmilla frowned as she realized what the nation that the words were common to was. "These words are similar to those being used in the Baharuth Empire," she said. "In particular, the ones they've been slowly tossing out Riastais ones for. I could never figure out the why and how of it, but it appeared that someone in the Empire had records of the lost language. Was it a move to legitimize their claim over the region, or an attempt to reclaim the past? She supposed it could be both at the same time. What does the rest say?" "It's a list with dates. Battles. I think the parts that I can't read are the names of locations used in the past, as well as achievements. This Beastman Duke was probably a great general of the empire that once stood here. Are there any other statues like this?" "At the top of each promenade leading to this building." Captain Iska led her around to the next statue. It did not depict a beastman, but neither did it appear to be human. A feminine figure with flowing robes and childlike features seemed to merge with the waves of water carved into the stone. In her hands was a simple, yet elegant, lyre. "Duchess Vila, Pentarch of Lagos. Eternal mistress of crystalline waters." 20th day, Middlewater month, 4th year, High Imperial calendar. I always wondered why she was there, the captain said. She looked like a kid, but I guess she might have really been a granny. Some sort of heteromorph? A Nereid, I think. The Velar are a legend amongst my people, but I never thought our name for them might refer to an individual from the distant past. Unfamiliar script flowed below. From the way it appeared to be structured, Ludmilla thought that it might have been a poem. They continued their circuit of the building. The next statue was an elf pentarch cradling an orb of fire in her hands, followed by a pentarch of an insectoid race she had not seen before. She could read neither of their names. A rugged-looking human came next, dressed as a warrior with a glaive-like weapon in hand. Duke Jelanin Yilman of Eric's Daubig, pentarch of Lagers. Stormbringer. 20th day, Middlewater month, 4th year. High Imperial calendar. Below was a list like the one under Duke Isker's. He appeared to be a militant member of human royalty. What's the smile for? Captain Isker asked. I'm smiling? Ludmilla frowned. Just a bit, maybe. I suppose I'm slightly bemused, she said. Daubik is my mother's maiden name, but she said that it's a fairly common last name amongst my people. He has a common first name, too. Despite the common name, it seems that one of us made it pretty far. A glow in the fog grew brighter as they approached what appeared to be the main entrance to the building. The statue of another human stood atop its pedestal, adorned in plain, but clean robes. The staff in his right hand was topped with a brightly glowing crystal. A large tome was cradled in his left. His somewhat humble appearance was made no taller than the rest, yet at the same time, something caused him to tower above them all. Ludmilla walked up to the placard at the statue's base, eyes tracing over the letters in the stone. High Emperor Archelios III. Lower Earth month, 59th year. High Imperial calendar. He had no epithet and there was nothing below the placard. The man appeared as unassuming as his garb, yet nothing could hide the sheer sense of presence exuded by the statue. She wondered if it was merely the exquisite quality of the stonework, or if the stonework reflected his existence in the flesh. This one was the boss, huh? Captain Isker said from beside her. I told the others that he was, but they kept going on about how the others had a more impressive panoply and additional notes below their placards. Preoccupied with her examination of the statues, the fact that she was supposed to be meeting with the Elder Leech's colleagues had slipped her mind. I suppose we should go see them now, she said. How many of your colleagues reside here, by the way? It's just the 6 of us, my lady. Don't tell me you each manifested under one of these statues. Ha! That would be quite something, but no, I'm the only one. The rest were born in the towers around here. Then is there anything I should know about them before we head in? Not that I can think of. We're just a humble little cabal that you could probably find anywhere. Captain Isker led Ludmilla through the cavernous entrance of the domed building behind the statue of High Emperor Archelios III. A row of skeletal beastmen that were probably skeleton warriors stood guard on either side. She eyed them curiously as they passed, still trying to sort out what the presence of the 6 statues meant. Did you dominate these guards? Ludmilla asked. Aside from those emulating animal forms, the undead we've come across before meeting you have all been human in appearance. Or at least human enough. They belong to one of my colleagues, he answered. How much of the plains have you explored? We followed the river from the former Riastais border. The Elder Lich nodded sagely, as if her reply explained everything. That would be why, Captain Isker said. Things change from place to place. Everything west of the Katsa River and north of the city that you passed before here is filled with human-type undead. The east and southeast of the plains have undead beastman forms like mine. Elven forms tend to be found in the cities. In the cities? Ludmilla frowned. I assumed that everything was of human origins before now, but the elves I know tend to prefer places close to nature. Nature is everywhere, isn't it? The Elder Lich said. We're surrounded by it right now. Ludmilla supposed that the negative energy-infused environs of the Katsa Plains would indeed be considered nature to the undead. Though most of the living regarded negative energy zones in a manner akin to wastelands, the environment wrought by such areas was sometimes referred to as an ecology of its own. Ludmilla believed that she possessed most of the same sensibilities as her former self, but she understood that this place was steeped in so much ambient negative energy that it would drive any living being away. As a revenant, She did not feel one way or another about its presence. In this case, she said, I'm referring to the natural environments that living elves might be drawn to. In this region, elves are usually found in or around forests filled with life. Ah, that nature. I have no idea why these elves would be different from the elves that you know, but I've never really fancied those sorts of locales myself. Does something happen when you or Ruins wake into them? Nothing harmful, Captain Iska replied. It just feels wrong. Makes you want to cozy up the place, if you know what I mean. She knew what he probably meant, but Ludmilla had never felt the urge to cozy up Warden's Vale. If anything, it was the exact opposite. Ensuring that life thrived and negative energy was kept to a minimum in her territory felt right, despite being one of the undead. Out of curiosity, she asked, how do you feel about the living in general? I usually don't think about them at all, the Elder Lich answered. I guess I'm like my colleagues in that sense, if they aren't around to worry about, then what's the point in thinking about them? We all have our research to pursue. But you have attempted to visit the ports of living cities to attempt trade, yes? The purpose of my efforts is to secure resources that can be put towards our research, he said. It just so happens that the living appear to have control over a markedly unfair share of the world's resources. They have what we need, and doing something like raiding them for those resources is only a temporary solution that will eventually drive them away. That, or they'll have something really nasty waiting for us the next time we come around. They came to a junction at the end of the entry hall, and Captain Iska went down the right corridor. Doors were placed at regular intervals on the right side of their path. A glimpse inside of each showed hundreds of skeleton warriors on standby. Have you ever been attacked here? In lagers? Not that I know of. Most of the living around the borders wouldn't survive the trip, and we generally avoid giving them any reasons to come after us. As weak as they appear to be, there's bound to be a few strong ones around that we don't want pointed in our direction. Captain Iska's steps slowed, and he seemed to frown. Is something the matter? Ludmilla asked. There might have been a couple of reasons, he answered. A while ago, we had two fellows living here in the city with us, Death Knights, both. One was almost as old as I am, and the other manifested about a century later. How many years ago was it? 10? More than that, maybe. Anyway, they both got it into their heads to carve out territories of their own. We are going to become great lords, they said. One went south, the other went north, and that was the last we saw of them. If two Death Knights had come charging out of the Katza Plains like that, it would almost certainly have been a tale of woe spread throughout the region. Ludmilla was sure that the slain theocracy would have destroyed the one headed south, but the one headed north would have smashed its way through the patrols of the Imperial legions, creating a flood of zombies from all the settlements that it passed. Were the elites of the Empire strong enough to stop such a catastrophe? I've not heard about either of your acquaintances leaving the Katza Plains, Ludmilla said. I guess something got them, Captain Iska sighed. You should have seen how paranoid we were after that. They were strong enough to match all 6 of us Elder Liches at the same time back then, and we thought the living would mount a reprisal for being invaded. Took us years to muster the courage to leave the city again. I imagined an evil paladin with a big shiny hammer waiting behind every pile of rubble. An evil paladin. Aha. The Elder Lich nodded gravely. The scariest part is that, not too long ago, I found out there's a whole lair of them just southeast of here. Altamura? So you know about it, his voice was grim. A couple of years back, I thought I finally found someone that would actually interact with me, a little human girl. She just smiled until I came close, then she whipped out a warhammer and almost took my damn head off. They're crazies, I tell you. As a respectable undead noblewoman, I highly recommend that you stay away from any paladins. With the captain's future appointment with Clara, Ludmilla wondered how she might disclose the fact that Corlin County was also a lair of paladins. At least they didn't have any crazy little girls with warhammers in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. After walking around what felt like half of the building, Captain Iska entered a corridor to the left. They reached the bottom of a wide spiral ramp. The Elder Lich cleared his non-existent throat. This leads up to the center of the dome, he told her. My colleagues should be up there. Well, they never leave these days, so they will be up there. Are you sure there isn't anything I should know about them beforehand? Can't really think of anything in particular, the captain said. They're all just humble Elder Liches, but I guess they can be a bit pretentious at times. You should be all right, my lady, you have a certain presence about you that I sensed right away. I thought it was mana. There's that too, he admitted. What I saw coming off of you was enough to make my eyes pop out if I had them. There's something more than that, though, I can't really put my finger on it. It's an intangible aura, like you're bigger than you appear to be. Maybe it's because you're a noble? Many races have lords and nobles. Maybe undead have them as well. What he said did have a sort of logic to it. A noble was not simply an individual, they represented their territory and its subjects, supported the sovereign and his court, and carried out duties for an establishment that was greater than themselves. To humans, this would be recognized as the weight of a title, the weight of authority, and manifest as a job class with various skills and abilities associated with the role waiting to be developed. As the captain had mentioned, many races had a ruling class, or at least individuals who occupy positions of prominence, that influenced their subjects. Was it possible that the undead had their own as well? She considered His Majesty, who appeared to have a powerful effect on not just her, but also Lady Shaltir and Captain Niska. In that sense, the Sorcerer King could be considered a ruler of death, a transcendental overlord of the undead with the classes to match. At the top of the ramp, Ludmilla found herself on a raised stage in the middle of a colossal auditorium that occupied the dome she had seen from outside. She stared up silently at the dozens of rows of seats encircling the stage, which filled not just the same floor, but a circle and galley on the balconies above. 6 large daises were arranged around the stage. Upon 5 of them stood the elder Lich colleagues Captain Iska had mentioned, standing amidst stacks of stone tablets. It appeared that, in lieu of having paper to record their research, they had resorted to scratching out their findings on slabs of rubble. Each elder Lich was adorned in the same tattered brown robes that Iska wore when she first met him. They did not immediately look up from their work. Captain Iska cleared his throat. "I bring joyous tidings, my dear." "Shut up." An elder Lich to their left snapped, "Save your inane prattle for the Livy." "Who is that?" At the elder Lich's question, the others raised their heads. Their crimson gazes fell upon Ludmilla. "A newly manifested being?" "No, its equipment is too strange. Too complete." "From where did you discover this specimen, Iska?" Iska glanced back at her. Ludmilla only smiled quietly, and he seemed to cringe. "I have the pleasure of introducing you to Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom." "A noble? An undead noble? Preposterous. There are those that rule, and those that serve. No, there are those that dominate, and those who are dominated." The elder Liches set down their stone tablets, walking forward to look down at Ludmilla from the edges of their platforms. Directly before her, an elder Lich of the human variety raised a hand. The others ceased their ongoing analysis. It appeared to be the most powerful of the group. "We are wasting time," it said. "All will be laid bare." It stretched out a bony finger towards her. "No, wait. Eldest. Dominate undead." Ludmilla narrowed her eyes. "Is it normal to attack official representatives in lagers, Captain Iska?" "No, my lady. I can explain." "What is the meaning of this, Iska?" At the eldest's shout, the 5 elder Liches leapt into the air, casting flight magic as they did. "That's useful." "Dangerous," the elder Lich behind them said. "An untenable risk," one to the right agreed. Captain Iska looked up at his colleagues, who had spread out in the air around them. "Cease this folly," he shouted. "The Baroness comes as a herald of His Majesty, yet you would turn her into the harbinger of our demise." "He speaks truly," Ludmilla said. "I have not come with belligerent intent." "There is no guarantee that you will not harm us in the long span of eternity," their leader said. "No, it is inevitable that you will." Ludmilla frowned at the strange sort of faultless logic. Since the undead had limitless lifespans and the probability of her harming them was not zero, it was decided that she eventually would. But didn't that same logic apply to every member of their cabal? Did they exist in one another's company for mutual benefit while at the same time calculating when the demerits of their cooperation would outweigh the merits? The elder Lich pointed his finger at Ludmilla again. The other 4 followed suit. "Eldest. Step aside, Iska. For the sake of our long association, I give you your only warning." "I will not." "Are you deaf to our words? Baroness Zaradnik comes in advance of one far greater than herself." "And I suppose that she told you this?" "No. I have personally witnessed his dark majesty. Even the great Kfandra Argyros is but a mote of dust at his feet. The eldest scoff echoed off of the far reaches of the dome. You have clearly gone mad, Iska. Kfandra Argyros has reached the cusp of 9th tier magic. The probability of this Sorcerer King being as powerful as you say is next to none. Even the Sorcerer King's vassals possess magic of the 10th tier, eldest. At his claim, the elder liches in the corners of Ludmilla's vision wavered. The eldest seemed to roll his eyes. I would not lie to you, eldest. Perhaps not, the eldest said, but it does not mean that you cannot fall under the influence of some skill or ability. It even seems that you've been dressed up like some sort of pet. Oh, I can feel it too, Iska, the insidious will of this thing encroaching on my reason. To trust and confide, to seek solace in its protection. Few are capable of exerting such influence over the undead. It does not have the look of a divine or arcane caster, a dirge messenger, perhaps? I told you, she's a... Well, no matter, render this creature run to ash. Ludmilla lowered her posture, mind racing to find a way to defeat 5 elder liches at once. The weakest was at least as powerful as Themis, who was a full adventurer rank more powerful than herself. The eldest was slightly lower than the powerful elder liches created for the royal army, who were roughly on par with Death Knights. At least 3 of them could probably damage her through her fire resistance. If they used Fireball, then she could dodge their opening attack. That was assuming that they weren't experienced enough in combat to pattern their spells in a way that their target couldn't escape unscathed. In that event, she could only hope that she was engulfed in the spells of her weaker assailants. After that would be getting out of the open, or at least out of their spell range. Bringing the battle to the corridors below the auditorium would be her best option. In her equipment, she could smash through the hundreds of dominated skeleton warriors stuffed into the rooms along the way. Still, it was going to be a long fight. Since escaping to a more favorable location was her first objective, Ludmilla preemptively activated Wind Stride, ability boost, and enhance magic resistance. She waited for the first sign of spellcasting. Maximize magic, Fireball. The eldest initiated their assault. Ludmilla launched herself forward, in the opposite direction of the ramp. As expected, the first fireball exploded right on top of it, turning the most obvious escape route into a sea of flame. A crescendo of spellcasting filled the air as the other 4 elder liches followed up on their leader's attack. Maximize magic, Fireball. Maximize magic, Fireball. Maximize magic, Fireball. Maximize magic, Fireball. She activated her Phoenix Feather Hairpin, preparing to enact a variation of what she had seen the elder liches do shortly beforehand. By skimming over the ground, she could propel herself out of spell range using the enhanced speed conferred by Wind Stride, ability boost and her boots of swiftness before they could cast their next volley. The other 4 fireballs hurtled through the air, striking the eldest simultaneously. Blackened bones rained onto the dais below, disintegrating as they fell. Ludmilla stopped in her tracks, confused, yet wary of continued attacks. A regal voice sounded from the seating nearby, echoing around the auditorium. My, the Sorcerer King said lightly. It seems that even the cold logic of an elder lich does not preclude foolish thinking.